Hello, everyone, and welcome to this critical conversation, how to discover, classify, and safeguard your sensitive data. I'm your host, Tony Napolillo with Spirion. And as you know, in a world that relies more and more on data, understanding and protecting it is crucial. That's why at Spirion, we're dedicated to helping organizations around the world protect their most sensitive information. We have a packed agenda today, and over the next 30 minutes, we're going to discuss how to quickly locate sensitive information across vast data sets, identify actionable steps to take upon data detection, reduce your organizational risk footprint with visualization tools, enhance your strategy for data security and compliance, and we're going to save time to answer your questions of our resident expert. And speaking of experts, joining us today is Spirion's Chief Product Officer, Ryan Tully. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, Tony.
He's going to run you through the points I just mentioned, and you could submit your questions for him by using the Q&A button at the top navigation at any time. We'll have time at the end to address them. And with that, take it away, Ryan.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tony. So let me start off with a little bit of background here, right, on why this conversation is even happening in the first place. And I have a slide for it while we talk about that. But let's discuss data in general for just a moment. So organizations, everybody has data at this point. Whether or not you're an organization that works entirely off of data from the perspective of generating, revenue from data, you're doing sales engagements, that sort of thing, or you're just collecting it from your employees, from your customers, managing it in a CRM, or whatever it ends up happening to be. Data as a whole it's required effectively for any business to fully operate. And overall, that data that you have is continuing to grow and expand and sprawl across organizations. I have some metrics up here on the screen about how we're expecting productivity data to grow based off of research from IPG in this context. That data is expected to grow extensively over the next year and a half, year and some change, and at an almost exponential rate, right? And especially if we work in the hybrid / work from home culture now, people are generating more and more information and data that's being managed and controlled by organizations as a whole. So realistically, what does this come down to? It comes down to there's a variety of data that's sitting in an unstructured and structured repository within organizations. Now, approximately 80% of the data is unstructured, 20% is structured across organizations out there in the space. To give quick context for those who are not necessarily familiar with those terms, structured data is something that's more aligned to like a database of information. It's relational, maybe not relational, but it's all put together in a very structured, organized format. Whereas unstructured is more along the concept of blobs, binary large objects, something like the PDF or a Word document or a zip file or something to those effects, right? And those particular pieces of data, they grow and they expand and they become challenging over time to go and take a look at. So if you care about your data being sensitive, which organizations generally do, it becomes relatively important to be able to find a way to look at these large-scale sets of data, both in unstructured and a structured manner, and also going through and saying, hey, is this data sensitive in a way that matters to me? And if it's sensitive, what does that mean for the risk that presents to my organization? So example-wise, there's a lot of different regulations that are out there in the market. And we can take a look at regulations in terms of privacy, for instance. Everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with the European Union's Global Data Protection Regulation Act, GDPR, in terms of what that means for an EU citizen. California with CCPA, CPRA, all that good stuff. We can talk about all the other privacy regulations that are out there, VCDPA, CPA, that are domestic, not to mention international. But there's privacy regulations that are in play. But there's also regulations around, health information, HIPAA. There's, credit card transactions, PCI, DSS, compliance, things like that are designed to ensure that there is a level of security and safety and privacy around the entirety of the sensitive information. So in order to ensure compliance in a variety of different ways, you need to effectively be able to say, where is the data within my ecosystem? Structured, unstructured, cloud, on-prem, hybrid, it doesn't matter. You need to be able to be in a world that says, where is my information? And once I've found that information, what kind of information is it in there that I have? For instance, if I care about HIPAA compliance, am I finding an MRN, a medical record number? Am I finding that in the same document as a person's name? Am I finding that in the same document as a social security number, for instance? And what does that actually mean to me? Does that mean that that's now considered PHI for HIPAA compliance? Am I caring more from the PCI side? Do I find a credit card number? Does that mean anything if I'm not going ahead and finding a name associated with that in the same document or the same database, etc.? So there's a lot of questions that need to be asked, and you need to be able to go through and analyze and be able to answer that. Not to mention, there's the trade-off on the privacy ones. So if I go and I look into a piece of data and I say, fantastic, I've looked into this file and I've seen the name John Smith. Now, John Smith means something, but maybe it doesn't mean a whole lot if it's just John Smith. Pretty popular name. But if I see John Smith and I see a date of birth in there and I see an address in there, then suddenly I know I'm dealing with, for sure, PII that's tied to an individual person, right? This can be tracked down to that person. And if that's the case, then I really need to be able to understand where that data is. But more specifically, I need to be able to be in a position where I can extract that data, as in get a copy of this file, so I can perform some destructive activity to it if it turns out that there's a request that comes in for deletion, or go ahead and even provide that to somebody if there's a request for access to that data. So a lot of ways that you have to be able to identify and a lot of ways to find it, and generally classification technologies are your best way to go about that. Classification as a whole has seen lots of different utilizations over the years. The common one we still see people run into now is you have a list of files in an Excel spreadsheet and a classification label on what you think that those should be. And then that's sort of it. Put it in a centralized location and hope everyone looks at it. But there's better ways to go about that, inclusive of persistent classification or even just semi-persistent classification in terms of an alternate data stream. A lot of cool stuff that you can do. And I want to talk a little bit about how we can help you solve some of these problems. But this is my background. There's some challenges out there for sure that are in the space. And as things continue to grow within organizations such as your own out there, we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye, and you're keeping an eye, on the sensitivity of that data and what you're doing. So Spirion has been, as a whole, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, as a whole has been doing this for a very long time, going through and identifying sensitive information that sits within the ecosystem, whether it's unstructured or structured. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how Spirion is providing some value in those 4 areas that Tony had mentioned at the very beginning. But we're tying this specifically to some cool new technology that we've been rolling out over on the Spirion side. So generally speaking, Spirion has a 98.5% accuracy rate that's been independently verified by a third-party group, the Tolly Group, which has confirmed that when it comes to finding sensitive information, we're doing it at an accuracy rate of 98.5, which is an industry-leading accuracy rate. But we want to talk about the new technology that we're coming out with a little bit today, which is our concept of a scanner node technology. This is our idea of saying, listen, look at those metrics that I had on that previous slide over there. Those metrics say that organizational data rates are growing and growing and growing. And the concept of sitting back and having a traditional manner that many organizations do today of an individualized process or an agent that goes through and scans for data and scans it with a hope of a level of accuracy out there, that's all well and good. But it doesn't take advantage of the concept of modern technologies in terms of identification of information at scale. And it doesn't take into consideration that people are discussing their data no longer at gigabytes or even terabyte scale, but a petabyte level of scale. So we put out this new system, this new scanner node technology, and we'll get an opportunity to show this off a little bit in tandem with other things Spirion can do, that is utilizing these modern systems in a highly distributed manner, a highly parallel manner, to sit back and say, I'm going to allocate a variety of different resources in my infrastructure to analyze my sensitive information at that accuracy rate. And by the way, while I'm doing that, let's go ahead and apply some of those persistent classifications I was just talking about. So now when I know that data is sensitive, not only am I finding it fast, but I'm also going through and I'm applying those classifications fast. So now that once that classification is applied, A, I know the controls I need to put on that data, but B, I can tie this into my data loss prevention tool, my DLP tool, to say this data right here never leaves my network. Stop it from going out over an email. Stop it in another form of data transfer, whatever that ends up being. You have a level of control over that. And we'll take a second or so to spin through that. So I mentioned, where we're at, what we're doing, what we're engaging with in terms of scans and just distribution, in terms of that scanner node technology. We also have some enhanced resilience and recoverability. We won't go through that as much today because that's less about your focus on today's conversation, which is about discovery and classification and safeguarding. But I want to point out for anybody here who's an existing customer or returning customer that we've added a bunch of cool things too regarding resiliency and stability to ensure that if something happens, like a user picks up their laptop and they go and they walk out into their backyard and you lose Wi-Fi connection, or they even go ahead and they drop it and you have to worry about putting the battery back in and rebooting, that all the sensitive data analysis and all that classification technology that's being utilized is continuing to go and you're not worrying about disruptions, which is kind of a cool thing. This is my last commentary I want to say about the new tech, and then I'm going to take you through some of the processes that we can do from Spirion to help you out with this. which is we made some changes, as I mentioned, to our technology. The goal was to keep that same level of accuracy, but also increase our performance. Should give you an idea of some of the value adds that we're seeing across the board in terms of where that performance was. So if you're an existing customer or a previous customer, or you're a partner that works with us, I know we have a wide variety of people that are on the call today. Keep in mind that with this new tech, we're getting some really cool, blazingly fast speeds, and we're really having that discussion about the analysis of petabytes in really small timescales. But let me take you through what it is that we can actually bring to the table for you in terms of the identification of sensitive information, that classification, and your concept of risk and risk reduction that you can really take a look at. Now, I'm on a dashboard over here. This is part of our visualization tool piece that we have up here on the platform. And I'm going to spend a few cycles talking about this after I take you through some of the most important parts of what you would normally do with Spirion, which in this case is discovering your sensitive information across your vast data sets. So the way I want to go about this is I want to actually start over here with a scan playbook. What a playbook is a way to go through and say, what are the business rules that I happen to have as an organization vis-a-vis identification of sensitive information, vis-a-vis classification of that sensitive information? And now that I know what those business rules are, how do I apply them to technology? So in this case, I'm going to make a playbook, and we're going to go ahead and say it's, oh gosh, I don't know. We'll say demo or webinar is a good example here, and we'll do the same thing. Ignore my capitalization. We'll do the same thing right down there. But what I'm doing is I want to show you that we have this particular playbook that will apply as we scan for sensitive information. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look specifically for data types. And we're going to look for very specific ones that we have out of the box here. In terms of, let's look for a bank account number, a credit card number, maybe a date of birth, driver's license. I don't know. I'm arbitrarily picking some. We're not necessarily sitting with a very specific regulation that we're looking for. But I want to go through and I want to say, this is going to be our analyze step, and we're going to look for that, and we're going to hit save. So effectively, as part of a playbook, this is me saying that when I analyze a sensitive data set, what I'm going to do, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check, when I did my scan, my analysis of the sensitive data, did I find any of those data types that were in play over there? And the answer could be no. And if I don't find anything, you know what? That's fine. We're not going to do anything about it. We're going to automatically just say we're done here. Let's close out our playbook. That's what my business logic says. There's no sensitive information. I don't care. Move on. But alternatively, if I do find, I want to do some classification, like I mentioned. We'll go through and we'll say we're going to go and we're going to perform an action on the file. More specifically, I'm going to persistently add a classification label to this file, or semi-persistently add it to this file in terms of an alternate data stream that sits with the file on the file system. And I'll classify it in the Spirion database. So you have all sorts of different ways to say, help me understand where my classification looks like within my organization, within my sensitivity of files. I'm going to go and I'm going to add that classification. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose highly sensitive as that. I'm going to automatically do that, and we're going to complete our action on that individual file and move on. I want to point out from the cool stuff that we have over here in the playbook, I can add a bunch of other decision trees. I can go and add additional actions if I really wanted to. I could say, you know what, once I've done my classification, let's go look for a different data type. Because if it turns out I have one of these data types and I have one of these data types, maybe I need to worry more about HIPAA classification than I needed to worry about at the very beginning. It's not just highly sensitive. Now I got to go tag it with PHI or HIPAA or something to that effect. But in this context, we're not going to do that. We're just going to say complete. And then we'd go ahead and we would save our playbook. Now, I'm not going to save this one because I happen to have a scan running right now that I want to go take a look at. And I went ahead and I set up a scan of OneDrive over here that we can see is actually in progress. And I'm utilizing 3 different scanner nodes as part of that whole matrix technology. We can get a look over there and we can see that some of them are doing scans at different rates based on the size of the data that they're going and they're analyzing. This guy right over here is sitting back and waiting for any overflow from these 2 that we happen to have. But we can also go and we can take a look at our results and understand that we're getting a level of classification, a level of understanding pretty quickly and easily on this data. As a matter of fact, this data gets streamed in at near real time for the identification of what's actually going on. So we can see I'm going and I'm finding data on one of my previous playbooks, one that's called inline classification, finding email addresses, I'm finding telephone numbers, and heck, I can actually see which ones, if I really want to, over here, right, that are being put into play. See some more information about what it is that we're looking for. But realistically speaking, we're finding it and we're applying that classification that we talked about, applying it to our database and applying it persistently to any files that go ahead and follow that route. As a matter of fact, let's take a look at that playbook for a second here. I can click right on my playbook and it will show me the path that we took through this playbook based off of the information that we found. So for instance, this file of sensitive information was my step where I went through and I looked for various data types. The answer was yes. We went ahead and we added a classification, complete. This one grayed out over here, didn't have it, so don't worry about it. We have the option to even go through and give you some visualizations and that sort of thing. Now, I talk about this in terms of classifying and finding where your sensitive information is. And I want to point out that as a platform, Sperion's platform, we go ahead and we find that sensitive information, whether it's structured or unstructured, across really any data type that you can think of, and over 280 different platforms that are out there that contain sensitive information. For me, I chose a OneDrive for Business over in one of my tenants that I have over here. But realistically, this could be something like a SQL database. It could be SharePoint. It could be, oh, goodness gracious, a DB2 database, file servers, or even people's endpoints, as in their laptops or their desktops. And I'll call attention to why that part's a little bit important, right? Is if I'm going through and I'm managing productivity data, I'm generally putting that productivity data somewhere that matters, right? And I want it centralized for the organization. For instance, SharePoint as a great example. A file system as a great example. Maybe I'm using an Insignia device to help me manage my on-premise and my hybrid capabilities. Regardless of where I'm putting that data, I'm putting it somewhere. So other people in the organization can benefit from my productivity. But that doesn't mean that I don't have information on my laptop, on my own personal endpoint. As a matter of fact, I do have information on my laptop that would be potentially considered sensitive. Maybe it's about me, but maybe it's not. Maybe I'm working with a client out there and they send me over something. It's got a credit card number in there. Maybe it's an invoice. You know, whatever it happens to be, I just save it off to my computer and we move on and we call it a day. Something ever happens to my laptop, someone gets hold of it, or there's a breach activity or something to that effect, that sensitive information becomes risky now. Rather than just a centralized repository, it's everywhere that you could potentially find this. And that's why it's really important that not just these enterprise-grade or cloud-level security areas that you care about. It's also important to be taking into consideration the endpoints that people are utilizing on a day-to-day basis, because if you're not taking that into consideration, you run the risk of an exfiltration from those locales. And to be fair, that's generally where people are going to end up first during an incident within an organization. Bad actors generally tend to be looking for credentials and data, or identity information and data. And one of the best ways to do that is to gain, a phishing attack or something like that, gain access to someone's workstation, and then go ahead and try to move laterally throughout the network. And if their workstation has the sensitive information on there up front, then that really becomes a concern in general. But either way, this gives you an idea of this flow. And as I mentioned, we can go through and we can do a bunch of different things in regards to those different actions. And some of that can include some remediation capabilities. So for instance, if I actually go over here, and I'm going to search specifically for that one that I just had, this is the playbook we were looking at, inline classification. I can go ahead and I can remove this step and I can say, I have found sensitive information. Now, what do I want to do after that? Well, as a matter of fact, I want to go and I want to say, you know what? I found it. I've gone ahead and classified it as highly sensitive. But at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start redacting information from it. For instance, I want to say, take that sensitive information out because it doesn't belong there. In terms of this particular scan I'm running, it's a really good example of endpoints, but I can do some other stuff. For instance, in this case, let's say I want to restrict the access to this piece of data. Restricted for everyone except, let's say, a file owner or something like that. But going through it, I want to restrict the access because this really helps me with my data security posture in the organization by saying if it is highly sensitive information, I've classified it as highly sensitive information, then I don't want anyone accessing it other than the person who owns that file or an administrator. So let's go through and we'll manage that as well. So there's some cool downstream activities that you can go ahead and you can take as a result. I talked about what you can do in terms of risk management and risk mitigation and how you visualize that. And I wanted to swing over to this dashboard over here. Actually, you know what? We'll start with this dashboard. This dashboard over here to help you understand a little bit of the visualization capabilities. You can see over here, I have a monetary number that's associated with actual risk in my environment. And it's a monetary number. We take it from the IBM Ponemons cost of a data breach report. You can customize it, and if you wanted to use Sperion to go do this analysis, to whatever data value you think is important. For instance, you may put additional weight to a social security number versus a credit card number, etc. But either way, we have a monetary value or an ordinal value that you can assign that will give you an idea based off of how much sensitive information has been identified utilizing Sperion's tools. Once you've gone and you found that sensitive data, how much do you have in terms of volume? How much do you have in terms of value? And then also taking a look at how much has been remediated or have a compensating control applied to it. Remediation in this case is a destructive activity, like I delete a file that was considered sensitive, or I redact it, as we talked about a moment ago. I take that out of the equation, so I no longer have to worry about the risk that's associated with that file. And a compensating control is something like, for instance, I go ahead and I remove the security rights associated with that file, and then that way I put something in play that's going to reduce that risk. However, you get an idea of what your residual risk is, or many companies refer to it as your accepted risk, as in, after I've applied my remediation activities, automated or manually, I have some data left that's considered sensitive. And that might be required for the organization. I mentioned some people monetize data. You have data. You can't just purge it from every system that exists out there. And you may not be able to secure it. For instance, using a CRM in Salesforce, sure, you absolutely have the ability to control that in terms of security and in terms of licensing and that sort of thing. But you may still also open it up for the entirety of the organization, and that doesn't really make it all that secure and controlled, but it might be relevant for members of the organization to be able to access it and utilize it. So what do you do as a result of that? Well, now you start running into the world that this is deemed accepted risk at the end of it all. So this gives you an idea of what your risk looks like over time. Now you can see I don't actually have a whole lot of compensating controls in my environment. I'm doing a very bad job of managing my risk. But you can get a visual that shows what your risk footprint looks like over time and what it is that you're doing to manage it. Now, I'm not doing much, but I can do a lot more if I want to visualize over here in our SDV3 dashboard, which is about sensitive data's value volume, which we already talked about a little bit, and the vulnerability associated with the assets that the data sits within. And vulnerability is inclusive of business processes, firewalls, things like that that are put in play on an asset to reduce the potential impact. And just by looking through this, I can already see that, for instance, my email system, my Outlook server, that's already my highest risk asset that I happen to have because it's got a lot of sensitive information in there, and I have very little security controls that are being put in play. So me as a user, I would step in here and say that the very first thing I want to do is analyze my email server hosted internally. Most people, I'm sure you guys are hosting that in the cloud right now, but for my purposes or internally. But I want to go and I want to step in and start managing and remediating and functioning with that information appropriately as fast as humanly possible. So that way we can reduce the potential risk associated with that individualized asset and make things a little bit better in the organization. You'll start to see this one moves down the list and the next one shows up. And then we move on and we do some additional stuff that we have. And you get an idea of what the risk footprint looks like over time, not from necessarily an individualized, this is my large monetary risk piece, but the ordinal point of view. What's my risk look like and how am I going to go through and manage that? That'll tie you right back into your concept of scanning and your concept of analysis and your concept of classification. Because if you're applying some sort of label or some sort of classification that will allow you to control whether the sensitive information moves throughout the ecosystem, leaves your firewall, leaves via email, you're applying some level of compensating control on that content, which becomes really important. Lastly, just to comment on all of this here, is hey, when you're done with it all, go run a report, go ahead and take your information, say, I want to go and I want to say, see, where did I find my sensitive information? What mattered? I can go and view my reports. I can manage my reports. I can do a whole bunch of different things to just say what's sensitive, what's not sensitive. And if I need to take some sort of action to offline or go and delegate it out to a data custodian or data steward somewhere within my ecosystem, within my organization, I have the capacity to go through and do that. So really quick and high level iteration on how we can go ahead and we can help you. There's larger scale capacity that Spirion has to help, and there's obviously larger considerations to take into play for an organization when you need to be worrying about your sensitive data and what that looks like from a pure classification, discovery, and remediation point of view. But hopefully this helps give some idea on what matters and how we can go ahead and step in and assist you. And we can have a later conversation, of course, by reaching out to us, or we can reach out to you to make that decision on how we want to move forward. That being said, I'll open up the forum to any of the questions that came in our Q&A. I tried to answer a few of them organically as we went through, but if we have any new ones, let's go ahead and chat on them.
Thank you, Ryan. We do have some questions for you. And if you do have questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll get to those before the end of the call. First question, what types of data can Spirion identify?
So that's a good question. So I mentioned that we cover a wide variety of file types. If you're interested in a full list, we have them on our website and we can put you a link to for sure. But it covers everything that you would consider standard, like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, Access, all that fun stuff, not to mention a variety of different platforms that we can interrogate for structured and unstructured data. So there's a lot of different pieces on that one in terms of the type of data. But you might also be asking, like, what can Spirion look for in terms of sensitive information? Not just where can it look, but what can it find? Well, we can find a bunch of stuff. We have built in utilizing our system, our proprietary system, to go ahead and identify information. It's something we built up over several years. But utilizing that proprietary system, we can look for a lot of the standard things you would expect, like a social security number, credit card number, driver's license, etc. But if it turns out there's a data type that doesn't quite meet your needs, or rather you have a data type that we do not have built in, for instance, your IP may have a classification schema that's associated with all that IP, like a QRST and then a bunch of numbers or something like that. We do regex work. If you're looking for regex, we'll do dictionary searches. We'll do a variety of different pieces. Not to mention if you have a high level of complexity that is just not available in terms of a regular expression or something like that. If that is your challenge, then that is what it is. We actually offer something that we call our search API. It's maybe not the best nomenclature in the world, but it allows for highly complicated algorithmic approaches to identifying your sensitive information by even going through and building DLLs that can be consumed by our product by passing in, the rule sets, etc. So short version is if you have sensitive information, we'll basically find it. If it's not built in, we have a system built in to let you go ahead and expand our capabilities to ensure that we can look for it. It's a good question, though.
All right, we got another one here. On the endpoint, does Spirion require an agent or something like that to be installed on each endpoint?
So that's a good question. So endpoints themselves, the answer is yes and no to that. And yes and no as in, if you have your endpoint and you have it somewhere in your internal network and you want to go and you want to set up one of our scanner nodes on a piece of infrastructure that you have somewhere and its goal is to point to an endpoint and analyze the endpoint, that's fine. You can do that. You absolutely can do that. You don't have to put anything on that endpoint if you don't want to. On the other hand, though, generally when you're going and you're analyzing data, getting as close as you can to that source of that data is going to be the most constructive way to go about things. So putting one of our pieces of scanning technology on the endpoint itself and setting that up to be one of the nodes is going to get you as close as possible to the data that's on there, and that's going to generally be the most productive way to go about things. It's unobtrusive. You can even sit back and say, consider this the lowest priority thing that's going on this machine so it doesn't impact users on a day-to-day basis. However, at the same time, it's still close to that data and able to process it, analyze it, and then call it home to that centralized console that we have. That was a good question.
All right, another one. How does Spirion obtain the level of accuracy you claim? That's that 98.5% accuracy.
Which is fair. I think that came from you saying that we had the proprietary little bit there. So we have something that we call CADIA. It's an acronym standing for Context-Aware Data Interrogation Algorithms. But really short version is, as I mentioned, we've been at this for a long time, 16, 17 years, something like that when this company was first made. And over time, we've been building up the basic things. Everybody starts with regex when you build a sensitive data technology piece. But over time, we've evolved by working with our clients, by working with everybody to say, hey, we scanned your sensitive information. We didn't find it in this particular file. Why didn't we find it? And then analyzing and evolving and building brand new algorithms off of that to ensure that we were finding it in these cases. So we have a very, very aggressive algorithmic approach that isn't matched by something like AI or ML these days to go and identify where that sensitive information is. It's proprietary to us, but it does go ahead and keep us ahead of the curve, right? And what you're looking for sensitive information up there with all sorts of things like regression analysis, regular expressions, of course, branching algorithms, things like a sea of digits. That's a really fun example I like is if you take a look at like a TCP dump, you may go ahead and find, because you have sets of 4 digits, you may find 4 sets of 4 digits together that appear to be a credit card number, and they will pass a check for a regular expression, and they will pass a LUN10 algorithm or a similar LUN algorithm for a credit card number, but it's not a credit card number, right? It's a TCP dump. So we have the technology, the algorithmic views, to take a look at that context of the sea of digits as well as everything else around it and point at it and go, you know what? Don't even worry about that. It's not a credit card number, not a problem in the slightest. So it's a really cool thing that's evolved over time, right? It's the multiple years, almost multiple decades at this point that have put us into that position.
All right. And if anyone has any final questions, get those in now, or else this will be the last one. My company is looking for a DSPM solution. How does this fit into that need? Maybe you could just give a really quick overview on what DSPM is and then answer that question.
Yeah, so really quickly for those who have not run into this before, DSPM is an acronym standing for Data Security Posture Management. It's a subset of multiple different data security governance postures that are out there in terms of what you're looking for. The really short version is if you're looking for a data security posture management tool, you're looking for something that can effectively find sensitive information within your environment and help you lock down that sensitive information and give you context of risk that's associated with that sensitive information. I know I picked these things because they were the things I talked about in today's presentation, but at the end of the day, that's really what you're talking about from a DSPM solution. There's nothing fancy. It doesn't need to be necessarily like a cloud native one. It doesn't need to be all of these different things out there that you see with a DSPM tool. Realistically speaking, you need to be able to find your data wherever it lives, and you need to be able to manage that data wherever it lives, and you need to be able to go ahead and feed that into your overall security posture as an organization. Spirion helps with that. That's at the very core of what our software actually does. So that's a great question. I'm glad people out here are looking for DSPM solutions.
All right, and that's all the questions, and that's all the time we have today. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you everybody for joining us. I added a link to the resources on this topic in the Q&A if you want to look at that. And this Tech Talk is also recorded, so it'll be sent to everybody here. And if you want to learn more, please explore Spirion.com. Goodbye, everybody.